One of the lesser talked about things when it comes to Palworld v Nintendo right now is the differences in reactions between the East and the West, right? We all know that the West is filled with the biggest Palworld cocksuckers imaginable, right? Full of disgusting man-child mongoloids, both from the alt-right and from the woke left, all uniting in this like torrent of autism to try and wash away Nintendo from the world, right? These people are absolute scum, right? I've been talking about this for years. My entire channel is revolves around this. Like, the Nintendo community on the internet in the West is completely toxic, but it seems as if that's not really the case in Japan because going by what we've seen, going by what's public, it seems like the Japanese community is actually way more pro Nintendo, which is really, I think, very strongly indicative of like where the lawsuit is going. If the general public in the country where this legal matter is going to be resolved is so overwhelmingly positive on one side, right? Like everybody is favoring Nintendo over there. They're bringing up how they plagiarize the assets. They're bringing up like how Palworld conducts themselves. They're bringing up a lot of the things that like I address, in regards to their weird apology letter, how they like tried to manipulate people by saying that they were a small indie company and that Nintendo was interfering with their business, right? Like the things that I was talking about, right? It seems as if at the very least there's a lot more pro Nintendo sentiment on the Japanese side of things. And to me, this is a very strong indication that Palworld situation is tenuous at best, right? That they have no public support in their own home country, right? They are going up against a much more established, successful brand that they plagiarized from, right? Like they are the textbook examples of the kind of people who should absolutely get the boot from the law, right? They deserve to get they deserve to lose everything after what they did, what they tried to do, I should say. Like this is a company that seriously thought they could plagiarize the biggest brand in the world and get away with it. So of course the Japanese aren't happy. Of course Nintendo isn't happy. Of course like Western Pokemon fans aren't happy. But there are a lot of people who want to see Pokemon fail, at least in the West, right? Like to me it seems like the anti-Nintendo sentiment seems to mostly come from the Western world, right? Like I've never really seen a Japanese person have like the same seething contempt for Nintendo that the Western world does, Like you don't see them like make statements about like like Guru Larry made that video like, oh, 4 times Miyamoto was an asshole. And two of them were like stories told by like Argonaut CEO who was salty that like Nintendo stopped working with them and made them irrelevant, right? Like it's things like that, right? We have this really weird anti-Nintendo bias over here that's that was cultivated by like Sega's marketing campaign in the 90s and was like escalated by Sony's propaganda like after they Sega went bankrupt, right? Like again, like we're dealing with 30 years of people being manipulated into thinking Nintendo is like the devil, right? And a lot of that is coming out in this Power World scenario where people are like delusionally making up these situations that like, oh, uh tries to take down their competitors all the time by abusing the court system. Like, no, they don't. Like, name a single time that's happened, right? Like, again, like, oh, Emblem Saga. Like, yeah, they had a reason to do that. It's like, come on, bro. Like, come on, bro. Like, you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to Power World v Nintendo. Like, all you can do is like appeal to emotions and try to gaslight people into thinking that like, oh, but Power World's better than Pokemon though, even though it's not. And even though it doesn't change the fact, even if that was true, it doesn't change the fact that the game is plagiarized, right? So again, like none of your none of your statements or your beliefs or your opinions have any real basis in reality at all, right? It's just a straight up bias against Nintendo. And I've been saying this for a long time. And it seems to me that like the Japanese don't have that same bias, at least not to that same extent. So they're able to look at the situation more objectively, and they're more willing to come out and acknowledge that this game is clearly a derivative product. Nintendo does have a right to go after them, and that they should be able to shut the game down and remove it. That's another thing I've noticed is that like people don't really seem to understand what Nintendo is trying to do with this lawsuit. Like they're seeking an injunction against them, which means they're going to try to have the game removed like completely. They're not going to be happy with like a settlement where Palworld like pays someone. No. Like they are going to straight up shut Palworld down because of like what the audience did in relation to this brand, right? Like again, it needs to stop, right? Like this isn't how like plagiarized products like this damage the brand it's plagiarizing from. And that's why they need to protect their IP and protect their patented material, right? Because this has led to this really weird situation in which people will religiously defend Pocket Pair like in a desperate attempt to like give Nintendo an L. And that's really all this comes down to. It really has nothing to do with Palworld itself at all, right? It is an irrelevant brand from an irrelevant company that nobody cares about, nobody will remember, right? Like this isn't about Palworld the game. It's about what Palworld represents. People thinking that delusionally that they're somehow going to get one up over Nintendo, right? The weird fan fiction things I've heard, like, oh, Palworld proves that Nintendo would do better on PC than they would by releasing their own hardware, which is, of course, ridiculous. But, you have people saying that. Like, you have people, like, coming out and making these wild claims about how Palworld did nothing wrong and Nintendo was abusing the legal system. And it's just, we don't even know what patents have been violated at this point. Like right now, people are like posting this claim that like, oh, it's some ridiculously vague thing about throwing items at monsters in the field, but like, no. Like first of all, they said multiple patents, so it's not just the one. And second of all, that's not everything that like that patent entails, right? Like again, they're being intentionally misleading about the situation in order to make Nintendo look as bad as possible. And that's what I mean when I say the audience is biased, is that they aren't interested in what the lawyers are saying or what Nintendo is doing or what the courts are going to do or how the Japanese audience feels. All they care about is misrepresenting the situation as much as possible to gaslight people into thinking that Nintendo is is performing a frivolous lawsuit, right? That's what they're trying to do with this. Like, oh, like Nintendo can't patent their products. Like, of course they can. Like, it's normal. So again, we are we're going to see like a systematic takedown of the Palworld properly. Pocket Pair isn't going to exist after this. Nintendo's going to take them to the cleaners, right? That was what Palworld was foreshadowing all along. The player was supposed to make Palworld the slaves, but instead, like the Palworld devs themselves have become slaves to the system, like making money and sending it to Nintendo, right? Like this is going to be a wild situation. And right now, like I've seen a lot of Palworld people like genuinely think it's going to end badly for Nintendo, right? Some of the biggest copes I've ever seen, like, oh, lawyers will work for free to work for Palworld to like give one up to fight against Nintendo. Like that's not going to happen. Like what are you talking about? Like it's the most delusional, like out there, just shizo, like conspiracy theory of autism I've ever seen in my life. Like it just isn't going to happen. Like everyone's fan fiction, like alternate reality that Palworld was going to be bigger than Pokemon and Nintendo would go out of business. Like it just isn't happening. And we're seeing a situation in which a lot of these people who have spent their entire lives hating Nintendo, thinking they were behind the times, hating on their hardware, hating on their franchises, hating on their corporate decisions, right? All of these people who just religiously hate Nintendo are at this point where like uh, they're their alternate reality just doesn't mesh up with like the real world at all. And this entire situation is a really good demonstration of that. Like we are going to see these people fight and claw, like fight and claw, do anything they possibly can to keep Palworld relevant up until like Pocket Pair just straight up shuts down and no longer is producing new content for the game. Right? We are in that situation in which these people will make any excuse, they'll come up with any conspiracy theory, they'll come up with any story. Like when all this is said and done, a lot of people are going to say that like Nintendo abused the court system to make this happen because they were scared of Palworld. But the reality is quite a bit different. And that is what I'll be documenting as we proceed with these court proceedings. And we will see how Nintendo handles this situation and how they completely take apart Palworld's meager defenses and it completely destroys the empire of lies they have built.